tech incubator home to more than 90 startups in Somerville and has supported more than 230 clean energy startups since it was started and created. It has created more than 2,800 new jobs. Mindy Lubber, CEO of Ceres, a sustainability nonprofit which works with capital market leaders to solve difficult sustainability challenges. Darlene Lombos, the Executive Secretary-Treasurer of the Greater Boston Labor Council, a charter of the National AFL-CIO that is building a movement of unions and workers in Greater Boston to capture the job opportunities in this clean energy sector. Kerry Bowie, founder and managing director of Browning, the Green Space, a voluntary coalition of leaders and organizations in the New England region that are committed to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the clean energy sector. Professor Kelly Ann Sims Gallagher, academic dean of the Fletcher School and director of the Tufts Climate Policy Lab, which works to determine which climate policies work and which don't and why. We're very pleased to have each of you here today. So let us begin, if we can, with Greentown Labs. Let's hear the story of what is happening in innovation.
I'll be glad to. Senator Markey, thank you so much. Thank you for hosting all of us here today. Greentown is right down the street. So we are a Somerville-based organization. We now have locations in Somerville where we have a 100,000 square foot facility and also in Houston, Texas. Greentown's the largest climate tech incubator in North America. Presently, between both Somerville and Houston, we have close to now 200 member companies that are innovating. And why? Like, what's the reason why? Well, I mean, you step back, you've heard from incredible speech from Gina, you've heard from the senator. Our goal is to basically take an extractive economy and turn it into a regenerative one. That is an absolutely massive undertaking. And we've got probably about 3 decades to do it. And it's going to take all of 3 decades to do it. The solutions to take our global economy and turn it from an extractive one to a regenerative one are not readily available. We do not have every solution that we need today in order to make that happen. We've heard about the power of solar and offshore wind. Well, that is decades of development that has now gotten solar and wind, both onshore and offshore, to a cost where that is really essentially commoditized, fully bankable technologies. Great. Gets us maybe halfway there. That's where Greentown comes in. Our goal is to take incredible entrepreneurs who are doing and building first-of-a-kind technologies and creating climate solutions and put them right next to other incredible entrepreneurs that are doing equally challenging things. And in the process, hopefully invent and innovate, invent entirely new solutions and innovate and provide all the technology we will need to actually get to carbon neutrality. And that is a multi-decade process. It is one, we've heard about leadership, and I would double down on that because we've probably got decades ahead of us and hundreds of trillions of dollars that we will need in order to make it happen. And so a place like Greentown comes in because it really is a community of entrepreneurs who are committed to doing it. And we welcome every person who has an idea or a desire to be working in climate to come to Greentown, join one of those companies, and help make it happen.
Thank you. Kerry Bowie.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Thank you to everyone here at Tufts. I'm actually a proud resident of Somerville, so I'm only a few blocks from here. So I typically drive through bringing my girls to school. So I try to come slowly through campus so I don't get in trouble. But I'm originally from Alabama, a place called Anniston. And so it is Johnny Cochran's last class action lawsuit post OJ was in my hometown. It was around PCB contamination, and so I get it from that side. I came up here, I applied to Alabama, Auburn, and MIT, so I went to the little engineering school down the road. And as Senator Markey was talking about Woburn, my aquatic chemistry lab, we went and took samples before it was a Superfund site. So I've seen that work going on. I worked in semiconductor, and then I came back up here and worked for Governor Patrick and for Governor Baker. And so I was the director of environmental justice for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that was great work. Some of the things that Advisor McCarthy was talking about and others, I would go to gateway cities in Massachusetts that he named and just talk about climate change and greenhouse gases and all the things we've been talking about. And the people in those communities, oftentimes, they're not climate change deniers, but what I saw was the first thing they would say is we need jobs. We need better education. We need, affordable housing and transportation. So for me, what I saw was I'm an environmental justice person and always will be, but there's an intersection between economic justice and social justice. And what I was seeing, to me, which was sort of adding insult to injury, was we were missing out on the environmental goods, the clean jobs, the energy efficiency, all of that. And so that's how we ended up starting Brown in the Green Space. And our vision is a just energy transition. And our mission is threefold. We want to create jobs, we want to build wealth, and we want to reduce energy burden in communities of color. So there's more, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. And again, we've come a long way when Darlene Lombos is the head of the building trades, the AFL-CIO, for all of the projects that are going to be built, and she's a historic leader for us. So welcome, Darlene, and could you give us the vision of this partnership that has to be created to create jobs and equity at the same time?
Yes, thank you, Senator Markey. And I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Greater Boston Labor Council, so not the building trades, but we do have the building trades. So we do have hotel workers, janitors, Teamster, everyone under the sun, under this umbrella organization at AFL-CIO. So thank you, Senator Markey, but I'm not the head of the building trades. But we do have some great partners within the building trades, and I come out of organizing. So really, what we see and what we've done back when I was at an organization called Community Labor United was to bring unions and community organizations, social justice, power building, membership-based organizations with unions to fight for the policies that we believe are important for our communities from our own lived experiences. And so we started the Green Justice Coalition, and that brought together unions and community groups and environmental organizations to actually fight for the policies that we want to see that had equity, diversity, and inclusion at the core. And there's no kind of sugarcoating. There are tensions between unions and environmental groups. There are tensions between environmental justice groups and environmental groups. There are tensions between unions and environmental justice groups. But in the Green Justice Coalition, we decided to come together and we tried to found the points of unity. Where are our shared goals? What are the values that we want to make sure are incorporated in everything that we do? Because we are about trying to build a movement for social justice, and we basically got to get over ourselves. Because we're never going to actually get to that vision unless we build a movement. And we're not going to build a movement if we start at the points of tension. And I'll just give one example that I had to do the very, very first, well, maybe I'll wait. That's just an introduction. We can talk more about it. We can talk more. That's just the introduction. I take the Green Justice Coalition and our triple win framework everywhere I go. And we have the building trades very much part of us and moving this with us and diversifying their own membership base, along with all the other unions, janitors, nurses, hotel workers that are also joined together with our social justice community partners to make change happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Great job, thank you. And your own, Professor Kelly Sims Gallagher.
All right. Thank you for having me and including me, even though we're here on my own home turf. The Fletcher School is a school of global affairs. And I wanted to try to situate what's happening in Massachusetts with the United States and other countries. In our own climate policy lab here at Fletcher, we study about a dozen countries, and we try to understand which climate policies are working in these countries, which aren't, and why. And one thing that we've learned is that jobs are at the heart of the deep decarbonization pathway. If people cannot see that this is going to benefit them, that this transition is going to benefit them, they're not going to support it. I think nobody knows that better than Senator Markey. And the United States could be doing a lot better than it's doing today. I think there's so much opportunity for the United States to create jobs as part of the deep decarbonization agenda. And I wanted to just put a few numbers on the table to help you understand how the United States is doing relative to other countries. And this is coming out of some research that we've been doing in the Climate Policy Lab on green industrialization. So in 2020, which is our latest year available, there were 12 million new jobs created around the world. And of those, 58% were created in China, and 5% were created in the United States. When we look at solar jobs, 232,000 created in the United States, 2.3 million created in China. Wind jobs, 117 created in the United States, 550,000 created in China. Geothermal jobs is one area where we're doing better. We have 8% of the global jobs, and China has 3% of the global geothermal jobs. And I could go into manufacturing as well. Just give you one example. Lithium-ion battery cell manufacturing, only 8% of that is in the United States, and 76% of lithium-ion battery manufacturing is in China. Now, those are the students who are here working with me know I've studied China a lot, so it's a natural comparison for me to make. But of course, China has a lot of people. So when you normalize these numbers across total number of jobs in the country, guess who wins? It's not the United States and it's not China, it's the EU. The EU actually has created more jobs in the sort of green transition than either the United States and China to date. So I think we have a big opportunity, but also a big challenge before us in this country. And it can start right here in Massachusetts, especially around offshore wind. In creating the jobs that are going to take us through this energy transition and also then allow us to get to net zero by 2050. Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you. And thank you for what you do every day over here at Tufts. Thank you. And Mindy Lubber, she was the head of the EPA for New England. But this organization she runs, it's in touch with investors and companies every single day across the whole country. Mindy.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And not to age myself, but when I was a director at MassPIRG in the late 70s, this was the leader. This person has been out there consistently, out in front of everybody else to build a sustainable future for us. So
Thank you, Mindy.
we all owe you a debt of gratitude, Senator. It's been a long ride, and you're great. The second group I want to call out before pulling the lens back a tiny bit, sometimes when we look at the climate challenge, which I look at 100 hours a week, or as you do, a lot of hours and lose sleep and so on, it's extraordinary, it's overwhelming. It is a crisis that we need to take on. One of the things that gives me the most hope, and then I'll come back to some other things that give me hope, because we are making progress, is the youth is going to make the difference. You are driving the transition, and you're going to continue to, not looking for an excuse to put the burden on you from the burden on people like Senator Markey and me. But things are changing because of the way you all frame things, what you're expecting, what you expect from companies, where you want to go to work, and what you want to do. So keep at it. Just keep at it. And throughout my very short comments, I'm going to implore you to do a lot of things, because you need to use your power, your pressure. This is as much a political challenge, if not more, than a technological one. And we've got to go at it with a vengeance. So we know the climate challenge is here. When I left the EPA, I said, I'm a strong believer in regulations, and I'm going to come back to some that are on the front burner that we need to bang through, and we need to do so now before politics or our political makeup changes, or at least parts of it. But the private sector has extraordinary resources, money, clout, jobs, the ability to change things, and they could go in one of two directions. It's never black and white, one or two. But they could pursue a sustainable future, and they could win, and they could create jobs, or they could move in the wrong direction. And it is already costing hundreds of billions of dollars for those in the private sector, for all of us, and those in the private sector in particular, who are not moving. Just think about it. Tesla, which people, General Motors, Ford, love to roll their eyes about, even 5 years ago, as it was growing, is now worth twice the value of GM and Ford together. I mean, what is that telling us? It is telling us the future is in a different economy, and it's a non-fossil fuel-driven economy, and that's where we need to get to. So a few of the things that I'm seeing without going into great detail now. First of all, we've made extraordinary progress over the last 20 years, and more so over the last 3 or 4 years. And if you look at large companies, the publicly traded companies who have reputational issues, reputational harm, they are all pivoting. They're pivoting in word. It's our job to make sure that's indeed. So great commitments. I'm going to be net zero by 2050, or I'm going to be net zero by 2040. Thousands of companies committed to science-based targets. That's great. 5 years ago, they were still rolling their eyes and laughing at us. But it is our job collectively, you all and your new jobs you take when you graduate, to make sure those commitments are grounded, and not grounded in 2050. Because if you don't start addressing the climate crisis until 2040, we lose. Period. End of story. We have to start now. If we don't turn the curve and make a difference, that means for any one of these global commitments, by companies, by investors, they need to be grounded in short, medium, and long-term goals. They need to be transparent. They need to be held accountable, and that's, again, where you come in. I will tell you, largest companies who we work with, Apple's and Microsoft's and others, they are transforming as we speak. They're transforming because they are competing for the best and the brightest, and you all are that, as well as many, many others. And none of you, the amount of message they are getting that young people want to work for a values-driven company. They could still be a profit-driven company, but a values-driven company that's addressing the formidable issues of our time. And that's not just climate, it's climate and equity and how they do their job. And we're seeing some of those changes because they want to be able to hire you, and they're not going to be able to hire you if they're not showing and acting on a values-driven platform. The investors we're working with, 600 globally and 200 in North America, they basically get that you have to act on climate. They're holding the companies in their portfolios accountable. They're filing shareholder resolutions. They are helping us drive the largest private sector companies to change what they do. And that's been great. But we can't forget regulation and policy. We're trying to bring these voices of the private sector, but no company could claim anymore to be a leader on sustainability on climate, even if they have good net zero goals, if in fact they are leading the Chamber of Commerce campaign to kill climate legislation. So we've got to be clear what we expect, what we ask. Policy is crucial. In the next 10 days, we may see one of the most important initiatives possible to move a climate and energy agenda through the Congress. We have no doubt the man standing behind us is part of that. But every one of us need to weigh in and make sure those tax credits for renewable energy, which are going to create jobs, are leading what's in those packages. And we need to change regulations, and then I am going to stop. We're all used to changing environmental regulations in energy, and we should stay at it. There'll be methane rules that really make a difference. But we need to change the federal financial regulatory system. 18 days ago, the SEC put out a draft rule for mandatory climate risk disclosure, where we finally get the information and we can enforce against it, and every publicly traded company has to file it. 508-page draft rule, a great rule, not perfect, but great. It includes all of Scope 1, 2, and 3 of emissions, if you follow that internal jargon. And already, in about 18 days since the draft rule came out, there are 6,000 comments on it, a lot of them opposing it. So we have got to turbocharge our efforts to stand up for the most obvious and important rules and regs and policy. That's what I'm seeing out there. I'm seeing progress, but it has to go at a pace and scale that's radically different. And if it does, we need to demand that that progress is made in an equitable way around justice, and jobs will come with it. Every company I know is standing up the largest sustainability team that they've ever seen. It's not even new products. Every accounting firm, their biggest growth area are thousands of new people on sustainability. There's technical jobs as well, but the entire capital market system depends on a different future ahead. I think we're on our way. So much depends on what each of you do.
Thank you, Mindy, so much. And I think she's laid out this investment environment very well in terms of how companies are moving in that direction. Regulation is pushing everything in that direction. And in the first quarter, I'm told the first quarter of 2022, for the first time, investment in clean energy technologies is now more than 50% of the investment in the energy sector. So that's a big change that has taken place. So maybe we could come back down, again, just following up on what Mindy just said about this investment environment that has been created. And maybe we can just start with Greentown and then ask you, Mr. Bowie, how you feel about how opportunities should be there for the black and brown community to be front and center in capturing a fair share of all these opportunities. So let's just go back down to Greentown. What are you seeing? Are you seeing greater investment in the companies over there in some of the 90 companies that are there?
Yeah, without a doubt. So Greentown's been around for about 10 years. In the first 9 years of Greentown's existence, companies raised about $1.5 billion of venture capital in the last year and a half.
$1.5 billion. All right.
In the last year and a half, they've raised $1.5 billion.
All right.
Okay. So there's really dramatic shift in terms of the capital that's coming in. This goes back to the notion that carbon is fungible. Congratulations, we decarbonized the transportation sector. Well, if we don't decarbonize heavy industry and we don't decarbonize buildings and we don't decarbonize the energy sector, we haven't reached carbon neutrality. So there is a lot of investment in technologies that should hopefully follow the same cost curve that solar and wind did over the last 2 decades. You have investment in green hydrogen. You have investment in energy storage. You have investment in carbon tech. Right? Carbon removal is definitely having a moment over the past month in terms of investments and policy. We're seeing a lot of investment in heavy industries, hard to abate industries, cement, steel. We have companies both that are working at Greentown on using novel technologies to decarbonize both of those particular sectors. Cement, if it were a country, I think it'd be about the 3rd largest carbon emitter in the world. So if you can think about how you decarbonize cement, not only are we achieving our goal of decarbonization, talk about building something really valuable, right? And that's, I think what we see is that there's incredible amount of investment that's coming in. I fundamentally feel it's still way too little. And what we honestly need is trillions upon trillions of dollars of investment per year for the next 3 decades. And more of that, not only at the earliest stages, but all the other stages of a company's growth that follow. Back to Mindy's point, she's talking about, institutional investment, the most mature form of investment, in our economy. Well, we need the venture to be there. You need the growth capital to be there. You need the project finance to be there. You need the institutional debt to be there. You need the equity markets to be there. You need every single piece along the way.
And you're saying it's showing up over in Greentown, $1.5 billion in 1 year.
It is.
In Somerville. Get that. Is that crazy? $1.5 billion went to Somerville for clean energy technologies. And I guess, Mr. Bowie, where are the opportunities for the black and brown community to make sure that they're part of this great economic revolution?
Yeah, no, this is great, but, and there's a big but. So we actually moved we have an office on Milk Street, CIC Boston, but we actually moved into Greentown Labs at the beginning of the year.
Beautiful.
And part of that, because we want to literally and figuratively brown the green space. Greentown Labs is arguably largest clean tech incubator in the country, but not as many black and Latinx and indigenous people. So we want to be there and we want to help. We want to be able to help connect people. And also on the money side, I think, we work on those areas I talked about, we're really doing workforce development, business development, and community development. There's still money lacking in all of those areas. If I think about workforce development, so we were talking about 2-year institutions and, you know, community colleges, in addition to, you know, we love 4-year institutions like Tufts, but, you know, some of these jobs, you know, green collar jobs are both blue collar and white collar jobs. So we want to open it up for everyone. So how do we get scholarships, and how do we help people to get into that? On the investment dollars that are going in is great, and we're seeing an uptick in things coming back. But if you look at the numbers, it's what, 2 to 4% of VC dollars go to women. I think it's like 1% go to African Americans. So if you happen to be an African American woman, it's like 0.002%. And so we've got to fix that. And so that's broken. As well as if we think about supplier diversity, how do we get more companies led by founders of color? As all of this money comes in, how do we make sure it gets to not just startups, and you know, I love all the tech startups, but just the more traditional energy efficiency, solar installer. We have a young man on our board, Abel Vargas, out of Lawrence, another one of those gateway communities, Valley Home Insulation. I think that Abel is the only certified minority insulator of color in the Commonwealth. That's
crazy, actually.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
And so we got to move beyond that. And then the last piece on the community side is all these programs are great. And when I was director of environmental justice, but if it's a rebate program, that's tough for somebody who's living check to check. If you've got, you know, asbestos, you've got knob and tube wiring, you've got mildew, some of those programs don't pay for that. And so how do we get past that? So there's still an opportunity. And with all this money that's coming, I'm really excited about how we make sure that these communities are not bypassed.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And again, we have to work harder. That was say that again. One, only one.
I think he's the only one, but
Only one what?
Certified minority, I think, insulation installer of color in the Commonwealth.
That has to change.
Yeah, and we're working on that. We just got
If we're
money.
going to do Lawrence and Chelsea, if we're going to do Roxbury, Springfield, Worcester, that has to change. So, Darlene, we're in the middle of a transition, and the opportunities are great for job creation. So can you talk a little bit about what is happening, about the evolution, perhaps, in organized labor, looking at these issues, and are you optimistic about our ability to harmonize some of those challenges, those kind of different positions that you mentioned in your opening statement?
Well, Senator, I have to be optimistic if I'm in this job, right?
Exactly.
We have to be. We have to be able to see the potential of what could be, not as what is in front of our face. We have to be able to dream about the possibilities. So that's why I do this work. And when we, at the Green Justice Coalition, when we formed this, we kind of defined what a green job was, because there was a lot of talk just, 15 years ago when we started it. What's a green job? And so much talk about thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs will be created. And we're like, what kind of jobs? And for who? And who's going to really profit from these jobs? And so that's really the crux of what we try to do and are trying to do, is to really redefine what it means to have a green job. Is that what you were saying? Racial justice and economic justice cannot be divided. Because if we have the best gold standard, LEED standard building that's energy efficient and all electric and all the things we want to see, sustainable, and that was built by a contractor, developer that was engaged in wage theft, that exploited their workers, that didn't pay wages, had health and safety violations. What the heck is the point, you guys? What is really the point? And I think that's what, many of us, people of color, BIPOC communities, when we see Amazon and Starbucks tweeting Black Lives Matter and, BIPOC this and BIPOC that, and then they don't invest in their own workers, and they're actually engaging in anti-union activities and trying to get their workers to not have a collective voice, to not be able to have a better job, to not be able to feed their families, to not be able to go to the bathroom. This is absurd. It is 2022, and these companies are profiting off of our misery. And so when we talk about green and sustainability and companies that we need to invest in, we need to invest in the worker. We need to invest in the worker and the communities that they live in. And so that's my job. That's our job. It should be our collective job. And so, I just think that it is important for us to invest in those companies that want to be sustainable and green and hold them accountable to their values, and to remind them that our values include people, include workers, include our communities, and we just won't stand for anything less anymore. Not in 2022, y'all. This is too much. And with the incredible leadership of Senator Markey and our president and our USDOL secretary, who used to be the mayor of Boston, I will remind you. It is really important that this investment that we're seeing in infrastructure and in greening doesn't go to the same inequitable systems. If we're going to invest in, say, childcare to make sure that women and people of color get into these infrastructure jobs, let's make sure that money doesn't go into the same old crazy voucher system that doesn't work for any other mothers like me at all anymore. Work life is so different than when the voucher system was set up. So let's make a 21st century childcare system that's universal and that works for everyone. In the same vein as we are greening the economy and greening and building a more just and sustainable world.
Are we lucky to have Darlene as the executive secretary of the Greater Boston Labor Council in the room every single day? In the same way that Mr. Bowie is now over at Greentown, over there every single day, just making sure that
Still
maybe.
hybrid, not every single day.
Well, but that's what we need, though. You got to be in the room. The voice has to be heard, and so we're very fortunate to have Darlene be a history maker, just in making sure that all these values are incorporated into what we do. We have to be the leader. We're Boston. We're Massachusetts. We have to be number one. So, Professor Gallagher, what do you hear here today? What do you want? What do you want the students to take out of what they've been hearing?
Well, I'm a policy wonk, and I'm a nerd, but I want to sort of help us step back for a second and think about if we were really serious about this low carbon transition, what would we be doing differently? And specifically, what would we be doing differently in policy? So much of the policy we've been doing is at the margin. I mean, great breakthroughs, for example, on the SEC, a lot of tax credits and, production tax credits, which have waxed and waned. If we were really taking things seriously, well, we should have passed the Waxman-Markey bill years ago. But we would also be really trying to prepare the workforce for tomorrow. And that's part of what we're doing here at Tufts. But think about that. What would be the components of preparing that kind of workforce? We would be providing scholarships for anyone who wants to go work in a clean energy economy. Scholarships to go to community colleges, scholarships to be going to vocational training, scholarships for people who want to work on clean technology, scholarships for people who want to work on policy and on good governance and institutions, right? We're not doing that today. I mean, can you think of any dedicated scholarships in this domain? I don't think so. This relates to the student debt crisis as well. And I think also we would really be investing in a type of policy that we don't embrace in the United States, but industrial policy, we'd be trying to figure out which industries do we want to win in this 21st century. Where do we really want to compete in the global economy, and making sure that we're upskilling our workers, we're supporting the innovation behind those industries through public investments in energy research and development. We're investing in places like Greentown Labs to incubate these new companies and new technologies. We'd be doing a lot more at just a completely different scale. I really take that point about, like, our scale of investment now is orders of magnitude too small in all of these things. So we really need to have much more ambition in what we're trying to do in policy and in business, and, in fact, in our support of students.
Thank you. I much appreciate it. Can I just come back to Darlene for a second? Professor was making the point about scholarships, but can you talk a little bit about apprenticeships? I know that the IBEW and others, now they have minority apprenticeship programs in Massachusetts that were unimaginable just 10 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about that and the transformation that's taking place?
Yeah, I am actually very proud of our trades here in Boston. We are a national model. It's actually Secretary Walsh who created this pre-apprenticeship program called Building Pathways that was very targeted at bringing women and people of color into the trades. That was 20 years ago now. And so we're seeing the fruits of that and I think you're referring to IBEW, the most recent number, they're the electricians union. They had an outgoing retiring class of probably about 95% white male, and an incoming class of about 43% women and people of color. And it's it's incredible. It is incredible. And it's about time. We are the ones we're waiting for, right? And it's not just IBEW, it's the painters union, it's the carpenters union, it's the laborers, it's so many of the unions in the trades that completely understand this idea of economic justice and racial justice cannot be unlinked. And our history shows that in the labor movement. And part of my job is to remind people about our history. It's so fun. We have a very strong multiracial working class movement. We always have. And so that's what I get to do, is remind people that that's what we're doing. And we're going to continue that legacy, Senator Markey.
Yep. So is that a good number? 95% leaving and 43% coming in. So those numbers are a reflection of the fundamental change which is taking place, and we have to accelerate all of this even more. $1.5 billion over 10 years, $1.5 billion last year. Okay, so in each one of these stories, we're making great progress, but not as much as we have to make if we're going to deal with all these issues. And I'm going to give the final word to Mindy Lubber, who has been working on this issue with me for 40 years. You've seen a lot, Mindy. Are you optimistic about where we are?
I am optimistic. We are in a very far better place than when we started. Let me say, from when I look at the private sector, we've got to turbocharge what they're doing and integrate sustainability. Sustainability doesn't mean climate and water, or climate and water and recycling. It means building a sustainable future, which is about equity and race and justice. And it's starting to take hold. But again, it's the demands that you all make as future employees, as consumers. But what we're seeing is boards get right now, not moving fast enough, that a board can't be all white, stale and male, or, you know, they cannot be all 70-year-old white males, or we will get policies and products that look like that. We've got to demand and expect, and we're seeing more of it, like everything else, way too slow. But when boards change, they change the practices of the leadership of the company. And when the leadership of the company change, they understand the needs of a much broader sector of people. So let's look at just straight diversity, and we'll get to equity and justice very quickly. But let's make sure that corporate boards, that people being hired, those numbers have got to rise, and they've got to rise substantially. It's not just in green tech jobs, it's in every job. And it's in every major capital market player. It's got to be the minimum that we expect, that the world of that company is going to look like the world they're operating in, and the board of that company is going to look like the board they're operating in. When I see companies now more or less starting to build out justice and equity programs, I mean, most of them aren't even sure what it is. But what we're demanding is that every one of their external task forces, groups, build in community people, build in people of color, build in people who are facing problems from climate change far greater than we are in affluent Boston communities, and let them be part of the discussions. And when they're thinking about philanthropy, although I would argue philanthropy is a separate thing, their resources, which is substantial, Wells Fargo, who I have no great love for, and they've defied consumer laws every year since I've been with them, but just put $1.5 billion in Washington, D.C. in building just and equitable communities. Make sure the people who are part of that are designing it who are people from the community. There is more and more going on. It's about jobs that are well beyond that we ought to start with, and of course, it's within the community of the jobs we're talking about, green energy. But every part of the private sector right now is ripe for looking at the economics, the jobs, the values of their corporations differently. And if they want to keep up in 2022 and beyond, they can no longer look like Amazon, where the only thing that matters is the bottom line. If they are not integrating values and justice and diversity, they are not keeping up with the times. We can all turbocharge that. I by no means want to suggest we're at a pace and scale we need to be, but we're getting there, and we're getting there quickly. And the same thing with the investor community. They've got a solution for everything. We've got to make sure that the opportunities for large investments and for investments in the developing world, I mean, we'll make great investments here, but what do we need? We need investments in the part of the world if we're really going to tackle climate change. With government incentives, with the World Bank, with multinationals, we've got to make sure money is not only going into this part of the world, but in the world that needs to be part of the solutions. I think we're on the verge. The discussions are happening. Baby steps are taking place. We've got to turbocharge that into giant steps, and we'll get there. I am feeling like there's a mini revolution going on. Let's just keep turbocharging it together. Thanks for all that
So
you're
we
doing.
can do this. Thank you, Mindy. And just to let you know, all Russian oil, to back it out in the United States, 5 million electric vehicles, 5 million heat pumps, 500,000 all-electric buses. Backs it all out. You know, that's a lot of jobs. You know, we can get it done. And if you want to back out all the Saudi oil, 5 million all-electric vehicles, 5 million heat pumps, 500,000 more buses. Backs it out. And the innovation is here. The workforce is here. We can get it done. We just have to have the will to do it. And that's really why we're here with you. At Tufts, we have a final panel that's going to start immediately after this one. But first, a warm round of applause for this incredible panel that we have. And next panel, please come up. Please come up.